let's take a quick look at what your settings are. So go ahead and click your edit button.
That's where the instructions have gone.
All right, so you can add those instructions to there. Yep.
I wonder if it kept them. Yeah, it did. I don't even know this is right. I just made this up. Okay.
And since it, I'll have to check and see if you do links. I don't think you have to do links using their markup language, so it's a bit weird. And so in this case, you might consider the actual YouTube URL in there, and then we can go back in later and add the links. I don't want to go down that road at this point.
No,
so
no,
the one thing
I don't need
that
you're right.
Yeah, we'll do that in a bit. I can follow up with you later, and we can fix the YouTube link and stuff. So the more clear you can be in your instructions, the better it is for students. You may think you don't need to provide a lot of detail, but the more detail you can provide to give students a really good idea of what they'll be doing, the better off you're going to be. So think about clarifying some of your instructions, and then that will help your students. But immediately I can see that you do have a serious configuration problem in that you haven't set up your student collaboration. And this is the one that will bite you in the hind end like big time. So click on that next section where it says 0 groups, open that one up, and then go to click where it says change. And then that'll open up a little more options. And so when you go in here, you have to decide, are students going to submit work as an individual student, or is a single student going to submit for everybody else? And then are students going to provide reviews? And in this case, individually, they get assigned to anyone. And if they're going to be submitting as a group, you probably don't want to use that as an option because they're going to end up evaluating people in their own group. So that's probably not a good way to go. So you want them to
okay, I'm confused. I thought this whole purpose of this was to evaluate the people in your group. Why would they add somebody in another group?
So is this a group member evaluation, or is this a peer review?
It's, well, both. I mean, they're doing a group project and we'd like them to evaluate the people within their group.
Okay. So then we want to go individually. So change that to individually. And then we want them to keep within their groups.
So the reason it's individual, this is what gets me. They're working in a group. They're going to submit their work as a group, but this requires them to when it says students work individually, how is that possible? Because they're all working in a group.
Okay, so let's back up. Go ahead and click the X where it says collaboration options. And I can't tell, let's see, so group project. I can't tell, Josh, can you see whether this is a peer review or is this a, go ahead and just click the X there next to where it says group project.
Yeah, I think we got to be all the way back in the.
So I'll scroll down just a little bit.
Hang on, let me do a dummy one in my sandbox and that'll tell me.
Okay, so this is actually set up, it looks like, because they're not submitting any files or anything like that. So this is actually what's called a group member evaluation. And so
Okay.
A group member evaluation is set up to not necessarily review their product as a group, so the product that they're creating. This is to only evaluate the performance of each team member as a member of the group. So
Right.
did they help out a lot, or did they just kind of
Right.
slack off and not participate? And because I don't see an actual assignment submission area, then this is actually a group member evaluation activity. So this one is designed so that each member of a group will evaluate the performance of the other members of their group,
Yes.
using a rubric or using a rank order or whatever you want to use in there. That's where we have to decide what are the sharing and the collaboration settings for this. So now that we're sure that this is actually a group member evaluation activity, now we can go back into edit mode and we can actually set things up.
To clarify, Donna, the difference between a peer review and a group member evaluation is, as Randy mentioned, a group member evaluation allows group members to evaluate the performance. So how well did they collaborate, for example? And peer review requires that students actually submit some kind of product. So
Got it.
something that they created, like a project or a paper or a film or something, and then they get feedback. And in that case, you could have groups evaluate the work of other groups, or individuals evaluate the work of other individuals.
Well, that's a great idea. And now that I understand the distinction, maybe in the future, they actually do peer review on each other's discussion post every week. But I think I'm so confused now. I mean, I don't want to go there. Let's just see if we can get some input on their performance in the group.
Great.
That makes sense.
So let's go ahead and you can paste in your instructions again there. And like I said, we'll come back and we'll fix the YouTube link. I'd rather get the activity really configured before we do anything. And then click on that student collaboration option again. And then click on change. So we want to go to individually because we want each student in the group to evaluate each other student in their group. And so right now it's set to review anybody, and where it says individually, we don't want that. We want them to only evaluate within their groups. So we're going to click there. All right, then click next. And then here are your Canvas groups. And so looks like you've got the default project groups that Canvas builds, and then you have sections, and you have 2 groups in sections. Do you have a separate set of groups that you want to use?
Well,
or is that?
Yes, and I won't know that until after the quarter starts.
Are they going to be self-generated groups?
That's right.
Okay, so until you have those groups selected, you can't do much with this part of the configuration, but you'll have to come back to this and configure it.
Once I know what
once you know what the groups are. So you want to make sure that this activity has not been published, because you don't want a student to be gung-ho and publish their activity before you actually get those groups assigned, because then that breaks everything.
Right.
So keep this as an unpublished activity until you get all the groups decided, and then you come back to this page, and then you'll select the group set. So you're going to create a group set out underneath the people link, and that group set will be whatever you want those self-selected groups to be.
Yeah.
And that lets students automatically add themselves to a group. And then when they're all assigned, then you can go ahead and change the settings so they can't move to different groups, because that
Okay.
also messes things up if you allow students to switch groups in the middle of an activity. So for this one, you'll have to come back and configure this one after you have created those groups and students have been added to those groups. So we'll just remember that that's the case. All right. And so we'll go back and we'll do that. Then you have your given reviews. So this is the criteria that students are going to use to do that. So if you click on that configure button there, this is where you can create different types of criteria. So you can start with a clean slate, or if you have rubrics that are in your library, or you have an activity that you've already made a copy of, you can bring those in. And because you haven't used FeedbackFruits before, you won't have anything like that. So here you have the ability to create different criteria, and you have 3 options that you can do. You can do just a rubric where you can build out the criteria, give the criteria a description, and then it'll assign some points to that. That's one option. Then you have a scale rating where students can actually use a numeric scale and give them a score on the scale rating. Or if you want them to just do text-based comments, you can use that last one, which is text-based comments.
Okay.
And so you have to decide which of those you want to use when students are actually doing their reviews of the other students in their group. And
So you can
do you
only
have
one.
Go ahead.
You can only choose one.
No, you can create multiple sections. You could have a rubric section, you could have a scale rating section, you can have comment sections. It's however you want to build it out.
Okay.
Usually though, and Matt, correct me if I'm wrong, to me, I either use a rubric with some a required comment if I want a required comment, or I'll use a scale rating and a required comment, because within your rubric, each one of those criterion, students have the option, if you desire, to leave a comment on each one of those criterion.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Cool. So the next thing you want to be looking at is, what kind of criterion do you want your students to be evaluated on when it comes to their performance as a member of the group?
Right.
And if you have something, then you can go in and you can build that out. But let's go ahead and let's just look at a rubric for now. So click on a rubric, and then you'll get to see kind of what the interface looks like when you build this out. That section at the top where it says enable, you can actually put text-based headings in there so that you have different things. So you have a heading that you can add, and some people use them, some people don't use those. And then within your communication, then you can go and put in the description for the beginning, the emerging, or whatever you want to score that. So up there you can decide how many levels you're going to have, what are those levels going to be called. That's entirely up to you on what those different levels are going to be. So you can just, and then you can adjust the points and the whole bit. So you can think about, what am I going to call all of these things? Let's go ahead and let's put it into full screen mode. This is one of my biggest complaints with FeedbackFruits is the horizontal scrolling.
Yep.
There we go. That's much better. So then you can change those headings at the top for each one of those levels, and you can add more levels, you can delete levels, assign points, however you want to configure that at the top. So you want to think about, what do you want those to be? And once you've
levels of competency, is that
those are your levels of, those are the levels of competency.
Okay. Okay. And so if they were big, okay, now I see what's doing.
And so then you would come down underneath, say, beginning, and you would give a description of what does beginning actually mean.
Uh-oh.
Oops, you've added a new one to the left. You can just click on the 3 dots and you can say, can
Okay, so
delete that one
where am I putting a oh,
right
right
there, right
Okay.
there.
Okay.
And so then you put your description in for each one of those performance levels.
Okay.
And you want it to be relatively clear about what the expectation is on that, because
Yeah.
when your students go in to do the evaluations of their other teammates, you want to be pretty clear on what does it mean to be a beginning on communication, or whatever you're going to title those things. That's really key, so that students are not lost on what do you actually mean in that particular area. So you really have to be very clear about what does that really mean, so that students have that rubric that they can compare it to. And if it's not clear, students are going to be going, I'm not exactly sure what is meant by this.
Yeah, and then they want to argue with you about it. But
And then they want to argue with you. Yes.
Yeah.
So when you talk about rubrics, clarity is really, really important, so that you get accuracy across things. So that's what you want to do there.
No, we use rubrics for almost everything. So
there you go.
I just threw this in here. I mean, I need to think about it.
Yeah, think about it.
May not be what I want to call it.
So then if you look at that left column where you've put communication, the other piece you have is that allow comments, which is by default turned on. But then you can require comments in that area as well. So you can say they have to have 2 comments on each one of those reviews. Oftentimes what we're seeing are people will leave in the actual criterion, they'll leave those comments as optional. So they leave that as a 0, and then they'll have a separate section in the configuration that says, okay, here's the required text-based comment section. But that's entirely up to you on how you want to configure that.
So it could be embedded in this rubric. Yeah. Okay.
It could be embedded in that rubric. So again, it's one of those things where FeedbackFruits has lots and lots of options on how you configure things, and those are all entirely up to what you think the experience should be like for your students.
Okay.
All right, so this is the area where we do that. So for now, let's go ahead, and we've got this kind of set up where we're looking at that. So if you wanted to use and add something to that, then we can go ahead and click on the X where it says edit rubric up at the top there. Is it not allowing us to close that out? Okay, it's gonna, let's see.
It says not all criteria complete yet.
Yep, so you'll have to put in something on the criterion name in that left column.
Oh, the criteria name.
Yeah, you don't actually have to put the description in, but you have to have a name for each criterion.
For all, there's 3 here.
Yep, and you can have as many as you like, but for now you can just put something in, and then it'll let us go back and set up another section.
Okay. Okay.
There we go. Now you can click done. All right, and let's go back into configure. And now you can see at the top you have a rubric section, and then it shows your criterion that you've created. Yeah. And then you can say, all right, I want to add a required text-based comment. So you can go down and click on the comment criterion. Okay. And then you can actually put your description. And so students will have to do a rubric, and they'll have to create a text-based response as well.
So even if they hadn't added comments inside the rubric, they would have to do. Okay.
Yep. And so this gives you an option to basically have an overall comment about their teammates' performance. But again, it is the description of what you want them to do in detail. So you give it a short title and then that explanation of the criterion, and you can talk about what will they be telling their teammates on this particular thing.
Okay.
All right. So then we can click done. And so now you can see where on the left of the configure button, it says feedback criteria, 2 sections, 3 rubric criteria, and 1 comment criterion. And so that kind of gives you a brief overview of what you've put inside there.
Okay.
All right. Then you have the next option is how many peers to review? Well, we don't really have any more than 1. Or if you click the drop down next to the 1, it's going to say everybody in the group. Do all. So you want to select all because you want them to configure each member of their group. That
Right.
makes sense?
Yes. And I imagine the groups will be like 3 groups of 3 to 4.
Yeah, and that's pretty common. I mean, usually 3 to 6 is kind of the recommendation on a pedagogical level. If you get more than that, then life gets too hard to deal with larger groups pedagogically. Then the next option you have is students also do a self-assessment. And if this is turned on, then the first thing that students do is they go in and they actually look at the criteria that you've set up and they evaluate their own performance on how well do I think I did. And I really encourage that to be turned on because you want that self-reflection piece. You want students to think about, was I a good teammate?
That's a great idea.
And then you have, the next one is, it kind of doesn't make sense when you first think about it, but later you'll really want this outlier detection thing. And what this outlier detection does is it looks at the ratings that everybody gives each other. And so if you have Billy Bob, who is just hammering everybody, no matter how good a work they did, Billy Bob just hammers them, gives them low scores, and he does it for everybody. Then with the outlier detection turned on, it will actually pop up and say, Billy Bob has problems here. He's an outlier. He doesn't think anybody did good work. And so it will actually tell you that.
Yeah. So they don't know that is happening, right?
They don't know that, just you as the teacher know that.
Okay.
And then the other thing it does is, so it'll also point out high performing students, low performing students, and then the other option that they use is students who underrate themselves. So you might have a student who everybody in their group gives them 5 out of 5, but they only give themselves 2 out of 5.
Okay.
And so the AI inside of the activity will go, oh, look, Jane has received straight 5s from all of her teammates, but she's only giving herself a 2. And that's an indicator that you might want to have a conversation with that student about why do they think their work is so poor?
Yeah.
When their teammates think they did awesome work. So that outlier detection is really important on seeing somebody who either gives everybody 100% because they don't want to make anybody feel bad, so they go ahead and they give everybody a 5, when the rest of their group members are giving them variable things. And so you'll actually get an outlier detection that said, that Andy he's easy. He's given everybody 5 no matter what happens. And you'll see those outlier things. And that's really kind of a really cool thing.
That is cool. Yeah.
And you'll turn that on. The new user interface design, you definitely want to have that stay on. then you have scheduling deadlines. And so when you look at this, the way this first deadline works is, when do students have to have completed the reviews of their teammates?
Right.
And that's what that date is. That's how we do that. And then it will show up on their Canvas calendar. And here's another bug that I pointed out to them. On the Canvas calendar, it just says you have this thing that's due with FeedbackFruits, but it doesn't give a link back to the assignment. So you just have to make sure students know they'll have to go to either the module page where you've linked the assignment, or to the assignments page and enter the assignment from there. And so I've told them, you got to fix that. The calendar has to be fixed, so there's a link to the activity when it gets put on the calendar.
Yeah.
Then you have allocations. Generally, I leave this as automatically do that. So you can let the computer take care of allocating that. And since this is a one-to-one, you're doing a review of your teammates, then it's going to allocate, all of the teammates are going to get allocated. Now, if you said, I need to manually change that, then you can go in and you can actually manually override the automatic one. So that's a nice function there. All right, so any questions on the allocation side?
Not quite sure I get it, but
basically all allocations is if it's automatic, the computer, if you have a group of 4 students, the computer will make sure that each one of the students in that group gets assigned to each member of the group.
got it.
And then you have the anonymity. And so when you turn on anonymity, students will see individual reviews of each other, but there won't be a name attached to those reviews. And this is an interesting conversation. We've had some conversations at the iSchool with one of our faculty members who had a group of neurodiverse students in their course, and they really struggled with having names attached to stuff. And so now they're working on, is there a way we can work around that? But that anonymity is something you decide, are students going to see who gave those reviews or not? All right.
I mean, in some ways in general, it feels safer to be anonymous, and students may be more forthcoming.
And that's true to a certain degree. Eventually, what I like to do is I like to get my students to where they trust each other, and I build this culture of trust so that they can actually have these conversations and they know who they're having the conversation with. But if you don't have that culture of trust, then students won't be honest in their reviews oftentimes, because they don't want to make somebody feel bad. And so they'll be nice and they won't give those kinds of reviews unless you have that level of trust amongst the groups. So a lot of people are using the anonymity part of this, and others are like that. You just need to see who's doing it, because that's what's going to happen in the real world.
Well, for the most part, these students this will be their 3rd quarter together in a cohort, taking the same classes and doing all kinds of things together. In this course, they will have been posting reviews on the discussion board, each other's discussion board postings for 10 weeks. And that's not anonymous. They do disagree with each other once in a while, I've noticed in the past. But they're very respectful. We talk a lot about respect and how to post something respectfully. So in some ways, I feel like it could be, names could be here because that's what they will have been used to in their other feedback.
Yep. So that's something just to think about. When you look at that anonymity. Your next one is visibility, and by default it just says students are going to see their feedback immediately. So if I evaluate Jane then Jane's going to see my feedback immediately. And then you have some options there to make them wait to a particular review deadline or after a specific date, or you can say they're never going to see this until I manually release it.
Okay.
And I've actually seen a couple of people say, nope, I'm going to manually release that feedback to everybody. But if you say by the date, so that scheduling deadline at the top, once those reviews have been done by everybody and the due date's passed, it will open it up after that. But a lot of people just use the immediately as well.
I think that would be fine.
And then the last section is one, if you have additional instructions that you want students to see, this is where you can put those in. And FeedbackFruits has put in tips for reviewing that are automatic, so you can just add their tips. There's a checklist that they have created. You can turn those on. And then you have a box at the bottom that lets you take a look at that. So when you turn on the feedback tips, you have that option of actually selecting which one of the canned FeedbackFruit tips show up.
Okay.
And so you can click the X and remove the tips, or you can create your own tips and add those to that as well.
Okay.
So just so you know that what's underneath that hidden button. And then you have the review checklist. And so you can also additional information. So you can tell students, here's some things to think about as you put that forward. And you can add as many items as you want to that checklist. And then you have additional instructions. So if you want some text-based instructions, then you can put those in that box there. And that will be seen by the students when they start doing the reviews. That'll pop up and say, here's more instructions for you on this. So you have instructions and a description for the entire activity. That's the one at the top. And then for each one of these sections, you can add separate set of instructions for what's going on there. All right. Then the third section, this is students get their reviews. And basically students are going to read their reviews, and they actually, it tracks whether they've read the reviews or not. So when you go in and check the student statuses, it will tell you that, you know, Andy has only read 30% of his reviews, and it assigns a score to those reviews. So they have to review all of those reviews that their peers have given them. The other option is that students also rate their reviewers' feedback. And basically this is, it gives you a slider that says, I found this helpful on a scale of 1 to 10. And then it has optional written clarification so that they can say, I found this helpful because of X. And then, yeah, so you can require that or not require that. A lot of faculty that I've seen are not actually doing the rate their reviewer, but that is one that can make students do a bit of self-reflection so that they're going, okay, Jane gave me this review, and do I agree with Jane? Do I not agree with Jane? Was it helpful? And then you can say why that is. And what that does is it helps a bit of self-reflection, but it also helps the other students to think about how clear their reviews are and how helpful they were when they provide those to the students.
Okay.
And then you have another deadline here. And so you can set a due date for when they have to have reviewed all of those peer reviews from their group members. And so you can set the date, or you can say, oh, it's open anytime. They can finish them up at any point. Most people are setting a date on this, saying you need to have your read your reviews by a certain date.
Okay.
And then you have the grading section, and the grading section is a bit weird. FeedbackFruits, when they designed the tool, it was designed for formative assessment. They really weren't into summative types of assessment, so the grading is a bit quirky because it's really about formative assessment. So you have to go through and decide. They have these built-in categories. They completed giving the feedback, so they have to actually provide those reviews. And so how many points, and basically those are percentage points. Did they write the minimum number of review comments? And so you can put a number of points there. Then you have the next one that says ratings received on work in total. So if you click on that little drop down arrow next to that, that will pop up. And basically what it does is for each one of those criterion in your rubric, you can decide, does one of those get more weight than any of the others? And so you can automatically adjust each of those points individually. And then the last option is they've read all of their received feedback. And so you can add up the points, make sure they're 100, and then away you go.
Okay. Yeah, not 140.
And I'm happy to, once you get further down the road on this, we can do another review of it before you publish it. And then you have some other things there, group contribution grading. There are different ways that you can add some of these additional features, but I'm not going to go into those right now. And then you can add different modules. So if you click that plus sign down there at the very bottom, there are some other options that you can put in there. So you can, at the end of the whole thing, you can have students select their best contributions. And so they have an option of going through and saying, what did I do best on this particular review? And then you can have them do a reflection on the activity. So basically it's that self-reflection thing about the whole activity at the end when it's all done.
Okay.
So those are all the options on a group member evaluation configuration page. But the key for you is at the top underneath your student collaboration. That's the one that you need to make sure that once the students have self-selected the groups that they're going to be in, then you go back in here and say select groups, and then you can assign the group that you want, or the group set, I should say. Select that, and then the FeedbackFruits will know which groups to assign the different group members to. If you don't have that set up correctly and somebody submits before it's all set up correctly, then it just messes up everything. In the same way that if you do a group assignment in Canvas itself, if you don't get your groups configured correctly and a student is too on the ball and they submit something, then it really messes up the whole group assignment because you haven't got the groups assigned correctly. So this is absolutely key. So you don't publish until you make sure that you have your student collaboration things set correctly with the work individually or work as a group, and then making sure that you have the correct groups assigned. Absolutely the most important part of this whole configuration.
Okay. So may I check in with you on the second week of the quarter for this then?
Sure.
Okay. Okay, great.
All right. Hopefully you found that helpful.
Well, yeah, you think? I mean, I don't think it was as intuitive as I had expected it to be. From the very beginning, even deciding, is this peer review or is it, what is this, But I understand the distinction, and thank you very much now.
Great.
And getting the personalized help was just amazing.
We're always
that
glad
was
to help.
great to record. That was great. That would be so helpful for others just to be walked through all of those decisions. Thank you, Randy. And thank you, Donna.
Oh, definitely. I'll go ahead and turn the recording off now.